There is a hidden option available to every single business owner that will massively help your visibility, but only a tiny fraction of people are actually utilizing this. In this week's episode, we're going to be talking about the power of podcasts. That's right. Bit meta, I know, because this is a podcast. But I want to talk about it in a couple of different facets, if you like. I think, firstly, I was having a conversation just this morning with a franchisor looking at how we really boost their visibility. And yes, go create videos, and yes, go be on social media, and yes, get out there in person. In person is exploding at the moment because we're craving that individual connection. And I'm on board with that. I am. But the problem with it is that it's a single shot. So you go out to an event, you're there, and then you leave. And that moment is gone. Switch that over for a podcast. And actually, if you're a guest on a podcast, you get the human connection with the host. And hopefully you have good chemistry on the podcast recording. But that's not a moment in time that's then disappearing. That is a moment in time that is evergreen. It's always there. It's always going to be there for somebody to come find you. Back when I was at Daisy First Aid, I was working in head office. The CEO, Jenny, did a podcast recording for blue light leavers. And a key target of our franchisee, was people who had been kind of ex-blue light and left. So police, ambulance, etc. She did that podcast years and years and years ago, just around about kind of just after COVID had kind of hit and we'd just finally opened back up. And that single podcast episode went out on their podcast channel and it got posted about a few times. But even years later, we'd still get leads from it where people had discovered that podcast episode, heard Jenny talk about Daisy First Aid and come and find us and find more information and then ultimately apply to become a franchise. So that's just one example. I had it myself as well. I was on Lisa Johnson's Make Money Online podcast, again, about 3 years ago. I was talking about franchising. That podcast finished, but obviously stayed on all of the, Spotify and stuff like that. I still get people who discover that episode come and say to me, hey, I would love to talk to you about franchising. I saw you on that Lisa Johnson episode. So the power of that evergreen presence, it's just such better use of your time. So if you've got kind of in-person high quality, then you should definitely be balancing it out with quantity, hopefully, of podcast broadcasts. And that's just one facet. Now, what I love about podcast recordings as well is that anyone can go and be a guest. You have to pitch to be a guest, and there's whole strategies out there. I'm going to shout out to Kay Suther here, who has got a freebie for how to get onto like 100 podcasts in, I think it's like 60 days or something crazy. So go find those resources. But anyone, franchisees can go get on podcasts, franchisors can go get on podcasts, business owners can go get on podcasts. And when you're thinking about like visibility strategy and what kind of podcasts do I need to get onto, have a listen to some. See which ones are bringing in guests, see which ones you like the host of, because you're going to have to chat to them and bounce off of them, and see which ones actually fit not just your ideal audience like bullseye on the dartboard, but your wider spectrum. So for example, if you run a photography franchise, maybe your ideal franchisee is maybe a mum who's doing the school run, or, you know, an ex-teacher or an ex-blue light worker. Well, there's podcasts specifically targeting those groups of people. You're a photographer, so therefore actually getting on any podcast that champions or talks about photography or arts or creativity is another win. You're also a business owner, so any kind of business podcast or franchise podcast. So you can see kind of like from a small kind of speck of an idea, suddenly the world opens up. And I think, again, in franchising, most of our kind of customers, whether they're our end customers or our potential franchisees, we're busy. We're busy people. We haven't got time to sit and watch TV. We're not necessarily scrolling through TikTok or kind of, you know, looking through the YouTube shorts. And it's important to be in those places, but actually to be able to say to somebody, I've been on, you know, XYZ podcast. For me to sit and say I've been on Lisa Johnson's podcast, well, she's a global business strategist. So to be on her, and that was the number one business podcast for a very long time. So to say that I've been on the number one business podcast and to be able to link people who inquire about me to that resource, As well as them finding me through that, it can also amplify trust as well. So that's like multifaceted, like 1 and 2. The next thing I really love and advocate for in podcasting is actually recording your own. Now, I appreciate that if you're a franchisee in a franchise, maybe you don't have the ability to do this. But certainly, if you're a franchisor, if you're a business owner, if you've just got a hobby that you love, podcasting is actually really, really simple to do, but it's so powerful. So I started this podcast in September 2025. By, where are we now? June 2026. We've had well over 7,000 downloads or / listeners of this podcast. I've reached 7,000 listens, which is amazing. I get people contact me all the time saying, I'm listening to your podcast. So I've been out running and I'm listening to your podcast, or such and such recommended your podcast. But what it's also done is it gives me a content strategy as well. So I sit here now I was going to say the studio in my house, let's face it, with my backdrop, which is a real backdrop for those of you watching. And I record episodes, and I generally try to batch them when I'm being organized. So I'll sit and do maybe like 4 in a day. And then I put them through a piece of software that helps to auto clip different sections of the podcast. So as well as getting my podcast episode, and you guys get to listen to this and hopefully get some value from it, I also then am able to produce social media clips really easily. I can write blog posts off the back of kind of what I've put in here using the transcript. I can put out emails about it. So even further than just promoting what's on each episode each week, I can then use the episode, if you like, as like a springboard for what I'm going to be talking about on socials that week as well. And so essentially one piece of content is doing a huge amount of heavy lifting. I put all of these out on YouTube. We get a huge number of views on YouTube, which is growing. So it's also growing me an audience on a different platform. And this is the power. I spend like 15 minutes doing this, but it gets a much better reach for me. It gives me a much more elevated visibility strategy. And I can have guests on and I can get in front of their audiences by having them on. So again, this is like the meta facet, I guess, of like, inside the inside. But there's no reason that most of you listening can't do that in your business as well. And we don't do it because we go, oh, it's a podcast. And when we think about podcasts, we go, oh God, Stephen Bartlett, overproduce, high quality, I haven't got the budget, I haven't got the team. It really doesn't have to be like that at all. Like, I'm in my dining room right now. I've got a divider, which I bought online. I've dressed it nicely. I've got some decent lights around me. That's it. That and a camera on the top of my laptop. You can get started really easily. It doesn't have to be high quality studio, professionally produced. Yes, that would be great. But it's not the end of the world, because you're not listening because of how I'm filming it. You're listening for the content of it. So really do, if you haven't already, really, really do think about how you can bring podcasts into your marketing and visibility strategy. They're great for trust. They're great for evergreen. They're great for discovery. They're great for you to actually get your voice out, show what you're an expert on, talk about what you're passionate on. When I talk about things I'm passionate on the podcast, you can hear my voice come alive. If you're watching me, you can see my hands moving like crazy. You can't convey that same personability in the written word. You can't. You can't get that across in the same way on an email or a social media post without video. So I really highly advocate video. I'm podcasting, and as well as having my own podcast, I also guest on other people's. Those podcasts can bring such huge opportunities. And if you've ever heard of Daniel Priestley, I really like Dan Priestley. He was an entrepreneur. He'd had a few different businesses. He wrote a book, and Stephen Bartlett read the book and wanted him on the podcast. So Dan went on to Stephen Bartlett's podcast, and just being on that one podcast absolutely exploded Dan Priestley's world. It brought him more and more opportunities that he, I'm not saying he would never get them, but, the possibilities that it brought, he's talked about, it's very well documented, how it just skyrocketed him as the key person of influence, which is incidentally what he teaches. That's his whole business ethos. There's a really great comment that Dan makes, and he said, in the weeks around when his podcast episode went out, Stephen Bartlett had these billionaire business people on there and all the rest of it. And then like little old Dan Priestley, because he wasn't very well known at the time. And he asked Stephen Bartlett, well, why did my episode do so well? Like, why did I get such a huge amount more listeners than like the billionaire that everyone's heard of? And Stephen very famously told Dan Priestley that it's because you're relatable. It's a whole quote about it. But essentially, you're relatable and you're authentic. And that beats well known every time. And so again, with podcasting, you have the opportunity to do that for yourself week in, week out. You don't need thousands and thousands of listeners to make an impact in the world. And I'm going to leave this episode on that note.